Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us as we wrap up our virtual author series for 2022. Tonight, we are delighted to have with us New York Times bestselling author Richard Paul Evans. He's going to have a conversation with us tonight about his latest book, A Christmas Memory. He is the #1 bestselling author of The Christmas Box and has since written 41 consecutive New York Times bestsellers, and is one of the few authors that has made the bestseller list in both fiction and nonfiction. There are more than 35 million copies of his books in print, translated into 22 different languages. And 7 of his books have been turned into television movies, with his first feature film just came out in November, A Noel Diary, which premiered on Netflix. And is, I understand, is also the #1 viewed movie on Netflix too. Is that what, did I get that right? He is the recipient of numerous awards, including the American Mother's Book Award, the Washington Times Humanitarian of the Century Award, and the Volunteers of America National Empathy Award. And of course, we have copies available of copies of A Christmas Memory available for purchase, courtesy of the Learned Owl here in Hudson. There is a link in the chat if you would like to purchase your copy tonight. We have that available for you. So, Mr. Evans, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate all that you're probably promoting with between the book and the movie out, but we are excited to hear more about A Christmas Memory. Currently, I think I checked this morning, it's #5 on the New York Times bestseller list. So this is what, book number 42 on your bestsellers?
It's actually 45.
45. I don't want to sell you short. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Of course, our audience, we are always more than welcome to add questions to our Q&A if you'd like to ask the author something. But we'll have a little conversation with him first about A Christmas Memory, and please feel free to put your questions in at any time. We can get to those at the end. So we'll get started. Thank you. So I kind of love this. It says you've been called the master of the holiday tearjerker. How do you like that title?
Well, that's a new one. The New York Times called me the king of Christmas fiction. I've been called the godfather of publishing.
I think that was from Booklist.
So I think it's great. Someone asked me why years ago. They asked me why I wrote books that made people cry, and I thought that's a good question. And then I realized that the books that really moved me as a child, my 2 favorite books were Old Yeller and Where the Red Fern Grows, both dog books, and both books that I sat and tried to hide my eyes in classroom crying.
Yeah.
Well, those are books that stuck with me. And so I think when you write books that are emotionally moving, I think it means more to us.
Yeah. Well, I would say I've read A Christmas Memory, and I've listened to it, which if you're an audiobook listener, I enjoyed it so much because you read it. I love to hear the author's words, coming right from the author instead of an actor or whatever, but I listened to it and read it. And let me just say, it doesn't disappoint. If you're a sentimental reader, you'll love the book. Well, you noted in your book that A Christmas Memory is one of your favorite books that you've written in your career as an author. What kind of makes this book stand out among the other 45?
Well, one of which is it's my most autobiographical. So most of the book is true. And I did sit down to write this book. Last year at this time, I was very, very ill. I had pneumonia, and I had never been that sick before. And then I caught COVID on top of it.
Oh, wow.
A friend of mine had the same thing at the time, and he passed away. He was my age.
Oh.
And my wife had never seen me that sick. It's like, because I always work when I'm sick, and I never got out of bed. It was like I was wasting away. I stopped eating. She started forcing me to eat. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of this, with this COVID fog and everything, this book started coming to me. And so I had to bring me a notepad, and I just started scribbling it down. And I thought, this is probably awful because I'm just where I'm at. And then 2 months later, I started to recover. I took out the notebook, and I thought, I actually got tears in my eyes. And I thought, this is the best thing I've ever written. And it was just it was just so powerful. And so I gave it to my publisher, and the head of editorial read it, and she emailed me one night. She goes, I was just going to start it tonight to read it. She goes, I just finished the book and I'm sobbing, and I've never been more moved by a book in my life. She goes, I'm going to let them know we have a very big book here and to prepare for it. So that's been the response. It's probably the best reviewed book on Amazon. If you look at that, people are really moved by it, but I was too. And I just, when I put it out there, it's like, this is my life. If you don't like it, that's kind of your problem, because it is who I am. But people are finding hope in it, and they're finding healing in the book.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how much you want to share about the book, because I know, we want people to read it, but do you want to tell us a little bit about A Christmas Memory?
Yeah, it starts in 1967. So what was interesting to me as I was writing this, I was raised in Arcadia, California, near Pasadena. And it was during a time of great civil unrest. There was the riots in Watts, that was not far from my home. And very much like today, I was kind of surprised when I read this, how similar it was. But it was also a time of the Vietnam War. So as the story starts, my only brother and older brother died in the Vietnam War. And it was the beginning of this downward spiral of my family. My dad lost his job. We ended up moving to Utah to move into my grandmother's abandoned house. After she died, she abandoned it. And it was a very poor neighborhood. That home was filled with rats. And during a very difficult time, my parents trying to deal with this, and I was very much alone. And there was an old man who lived next door named Mr. Foster. And he was a kind old man, and he was my friend. And he was a Black man. That was just such an interesting relationship, a young boy and an old Black man, and how he watched over me, and the wisdom I got from him to help survive a really hard time.
One thing I really loved, it was literally like the first page of your book. You talked about how whenever you think about this memory, it's like you see it in black and white. I think from your book, you said, I don't know why, but in my mind, the memory still comes to me in black and white, like television was back then. I think that's so true. Like when I think back to, my grandparents or even my parents, like you always do have that kind of historical like time in your mind of traditions that were back then, or the way things looked. Christmas tree, whenever I think of my grandparents, I think of like their old Christmas tree with the tinsel and the glass ornaments and stuff. But I liked how you started that, just saying, whenever you think of this memory, it always comes to you in black and white, like the time, the decade that it was.
The actual line was actually changed by my editor, and what it says is black and white, like television was back then, and like we were. And
interesting.
Memory is a big part of the story, because of course the whole book is a Christmas memory. But it was also my mother's memory. My mother, before we moved, she had this idealized memory, this idyllic memory of what this home was like. And when she was little, it's like she lived with her 11 siblings, and they lived basically in a farm. There were just fields around them and cornfields, and everything was happy. And it had changed a lot in those 30 years. And by the time I got there, when we moved there, it's like it was an inner city. The school was a horrific place. It was bullied and beaten up a lot. We were by the ponds and pawn shops and bars of State Street. And I remember saying in the book, I said to my father, I don't think this is the same place my mom remembered. It's like, this is an awful place. And it really was. One of the characters in the book is Mrs. Covey. She was a school teacher. And someone said to me, and yeah, you smile because like everyone, you really hate Mrs. Covey. It's like, she was maybe borderline, if not overtly abusive. And what's interesting is once a book comes out and goes national, and you start hearing from people. I've met two people who knew her. And the one said to me, a woman, actually a man said, my wife had her. She still has PTSD from that time. Another said I didn't have her. I went to that school. So he went to the school about 3 years after me. And I was only there 1 year. And he said, I was terrified of that woman. She was cruel.
Hmm.
So the way I describe her in the book, it's like, that's exactly how she is. Yeah. It's all true. Yeah.
I think, your books, you reach people, so you probably reach audiences in so many different ways with either heartwarming stories or inspirational stories. But I think what I appreciated most about A Christmas Memory was just the way that you beautifully conveyed the spirit of the season. It's basically like the spirit of the holiday season is just really what or where you look for it. It's not, for some people, the holiday season is the decorations and the feel of the holidays, the lights, the songs, the music, the things that we think of when we think of holiday traditions. But I think your story kind of talks a lot about the spirit of the season is really where you look for it. And I think in your book, you really found the spirit of the season through your friendship with Mr. Foster.
Yeah, I mean, I love Christmas, and it was the one time of the year that it felt like magic was real, that life was good. And that it was, most of life was it felt like survival growing up.
Mm-hmm.
It felt tough. So, but Christmas felt magic to me. And I think I still feel some of that in my heart.
I would say also, just from reading the book, as much as it probably influenced your life as well, but just reading some of Mr. Foster's kind of profound wisdom was just, it kind of took me away. Like some of the things that he had written, or talked to you about, the one that kind of stuck to me the most was sometimes it's the brevity of a thing that makes something valuable. And he talks about how, if Christmas was all the time, it wouldn't be as special as it is, or really anything like sunrises, sunsets. If those things were not brief, we wouldn't appreciate them as much as we do.
Yeah, and there's a line that's connected very near that he says, grief is the truest evidence of love. And we're so grateful to have something to love, even if it means that we have to lose it. And so the book does deal with grief, and it's about grief. I remember one of the first readers before the book was out, I gave it to a friend, and her sister just passed away. I gave it to her, and she called me the next day, and she said, I can't believe the peace and the insight this gave me. And I want to buy 14 copies. How do I get them? Because she wanted to share it with her family. And that is very much like my first book, The Christmas Box. It was very healing for people who had lost children. And I was hearing that. I mean, one woman said to me years later, she said, that year I had just had a baby and my baby died. That year that the book came out. She goes, whatever message you were getting out, you got it out, because I got 16 copies of your book. Aww. And it's like, yeah. So, but I'm I'm pleased that it brings peace, and that's the hope of it. And so, I love the words of Mr. Foster, and I think that makes the book. As someone said, I've been going through with a highlighter and marking all the things I thought were profound.
How old were you when you had your friendship with Mr. Foster?
Well, in the book, I was 9.
9, okay.
In real life, I fudged it a little bit. So,
okay. Well, I mean,
it is a novel.
Some of the things we were just talking about, like grief is the truest evidence of love. As an adult, that took a while to just kind of even take that in. Like, wow, that's honest and true, and it's very profound. But I just wonder how, as a 9-year-old, when he would impart these wisdoms on you, did you kind of understand what it was that he was trying to pass on to you, or do you feel like it wasn't until you were a little older that you really came to appreciate those things that he shared with you?
Well, and some of them, of course, were I made up. I'm So, and so part of it is just wisdom from life, and some of it was just a kind old man. And you would never let a little boy go to an old man's house today, and but he was kind, and he had lots of chocolates, brought chocolate stars, which at the time we never had candy. I just thought that was the most amazing delicacy ever. These little stars. But yeah, there's better chocolates than Brock. Yeah.
Yeah, in your book, in your author's note, you had mentioned that the friendship that you built with Mr. Foster when you were a young boy would not very likely be a same kind of relationship that you would have here in 2022. And I could honestly, it's kind of a sad realization and a little unfortunate because our different generations can learn so much from each other.
Well,
But
I think the book's important in the sense that there's a very strong and loving male role model,
mhm,
which isn't often portrayed in the media today.
yeah,
That was one of my assistant. She let her husband read the book way before it came out, and most of my readers are female. And anyway, he took it up to his room. She didn't know he was reading it, but he came downstairs, and she looked at his eyes, and they were puffy. She's like, "What's wrong? What happened?" Because he never cries, and she goes, "Did something happen to the kids?" She was panicked, and then all of a sudden it came to her. She goes, "Oh, you read the book? You read Rick's book?" And he just nodded, and he said, "We'll talk later." And one of his comments was, it was really refreshing to find a strong, good man
mhm,
in the book, and that we just don't read enough of that today. And it's been fun to see online on the reviews, especially like on Amazon, people writing, that's where it's like, I had a Mr. Foster too.
mhm.
It was Mr. Cliff, or
Yeah.
Mr. And it's great to see that, that people are having these experiences, because there are wonderful people who help us grow up, and we need that.
Yeah, I mean, if anything good came from being, in our houses more and a little bit more isolated, I think the opportunities for reflection and reminiscing, certainly, especially during the holiday season where a lot of people weren't able to visit with family the past 2 years. I'm sure this was just kind of a nice way to reminisce about holidays that once were. You talked about in your book, sometimes passages come to you and you wonder if your brother or Mr. Foster were kind of muses to you, helping you just write. Is that where you kind of get your inspiration from? Like what makes you come up with your stories?
Yeah, I don't know. And that's really, like I said, I was very sick when this one came to me, and it just poured into my mind. And there are times when it feels like it's just being downloaded. I remember one time I was working on a book, and all of a sudden I saw the whole thing like a movie. I was on the elliptical, and all of a sudden I just saw this whole book. It's like, oh my goodness, okay, now I just need to write it. So I don't know where ideas come from. We talk about muses. There's definitely is something. When my muse stops talking, I'll stop writing. And I looked at like 45 books, really. It's crazy. And everyone's
Yeah,
different, and they're all unique. So I'm not totally sure where they all come from.
yeah.
I'm grateful every time. And then you were mentioning like my Michael Bay series, which is so very, very different. But it also it doesn't just like flow always. It's also a lot of work.
Yeah.
Like I was working on the Michael Bay series, and I was in a hotel because I was trying to hit a deadline. So I locked myself away, and I was writing 18 hours a day.
Wow.
And then it's like, I called my wife. It's like, I have to go to the Amazon jungle. She's like, "I'm not coming home." I go, "No, I booked a flight. I'm flying into Peru, and I just have to go to the jungle," because I just had to be there, and I did. And I didn't enjoy it at all. But went deep into the jungle, and I got what I needed to write the book. And that's really important, that the scenes are set just right, and it's about those details. And it's also about honoring your readers. They have a lot of other writers they can choose from. There's millions of other books out there, and if they're going to choose yours, you better have done everything you can to make it as exciting and intriguing and interesting, and enjoyable as possible.
Well, you certainly do a good job of creating the scene. Like one thing I would say from like when you talked about your experience at Mr. Foster's house, he was always baking cookies, and you can just picture walking into that house and smelling those delicious sugar cookies baking in the oven, and just the comfort that I'm sure that probably brought. But you're obviously very, very good at filling in all the details that we can just read and feel like we're a part of that
Well, thank you.
scene.
Well, thank you. I think a book is a smorgasbord, And it's like, someone asked me why I put so much food in my books. And I said, well, two reasons. One, it's enjoyable. People feel like they went through the experience, even if vicariously. And second, if you want to know someone, ask what they eat. If you told me you had a protein shake for breakfast this morning, or you had kippers, or it's I had steak and eggs. It's like whatever you eat, it tells you a lot. Like my brother would have it would be like potatoes fried in cheese and bacon grease. It's like, okay, that's totally him. It's something that we would never eat at our house.
Mhm.
Very careful about what we eat, and it's like, it explains a lot. And so that's why I put food such a big part of it, but especially when you're trying to create a scene, a scene. And for a little boy to actually have a treat, sit down, come in, he comes in, he makes him a hot cocoa, and he even goes into the history of Swiss Miss, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's enjoyable for the reader. I want to take the reader and take them out of their own lives and put them into a different world. And if I don't do that as a writer, then I've failed. And so, and then when you really do that, it surprises them. It's kind of like a spiritual alchemy, that you can take these words on a page and turn into emotion. And so when people call me and want to, well, when this book, before it came out, I wanted to test it. So I invited, I had a friend invite some friends. So we had 18 women go up to a cabin and read the book. And most of them weren't even my readers. So I thought this will be interesting to see what happens. And I realized something really beautiful, that it did something that I thought was really amazing. It triggered this kind of maternal instinct in the women. And so the first woman who finished the book, I mean, they were like sniffing and crying, and some ugly crying throughout the entire house. It was kind of, I thought, wow, this book is really hitting the mark. But it was a young woman. She was 22 years old. And she walked up, she just looked at me. And here, I just turned 60. So she's looking at me, and she said, she had tears in her eyes. She said, "May I hold you?" I thought, well, that's interesting. That was her response. And it's like, she doesn't want to hold me. She wants to hold that little boy and what he went through. And I thought that was like pretty beautiful. And then it was repeated like 12 other times a night, the exact same thing. The woman came and says, "Can I hold you?" It's like, it's a book that can trigger something like that. I think is really, really kind of amazing. And there are books that have triggered, those kinds of feelings in me, and you don't forget them.
Absolutely. Well, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about, because you have a lot of success from your very first book, The Christmas Box. And that is one of your books that was turned into a movie. But kind of an interesting story about the Christmas Box. Do you mind talking a little bit about your the angel Christmas Box angel statue?
No, actually,
That is,
in fact, I don't know if you have a picture. I have a picture right here, because that's where we were last night. Every year we have a ceremony, and that's the original angel statue. What happened when I wrote the first book? I was nearly done, but it was just missing something.
Mhm.
And I used to visit this elderly woman in my neighborhood, and I just kind of watched over her. And my church had asked me to keep an eye on her. It's like, okay, so, and we became really close friends. And so I was visiting her one day. She seemed really sad, and I said, "Leah, why are you sad?" And she started talking about her childhood. She said, "I just miss my mom and my dad." And then she talked about her childhood. She talked about being in the cemetery and this angel statue, and that they used to play she and her sister used to play hide and seek. And one time they were playing, it was snowing, and they heard this wailing, and she thought it was a ghost. And they ran up and behind a tombstone and looked over. They saw a woman covered in snow at the base of an angel statue. Well, as soon as she said that, it's like it hit me. It's like, oh my, that's what I'm looking. That's what I need. And I put that in my book. Well, I had no idea at the time the book was going to be an international bestseller, right? And so people start coming looking for the statue, kind of like John Barantz in the Garden of Good and Evil. Midnight in the
Where
Garden of Evil, people go look for that statue.
where is the original one at?
It was in Salt Lake City, but
Okay.
it was destroyed. The
Oh,
original was destroyed, and I remember walking through and she had two canes. She was very old. And she walked as far as she couldn't find. She was frustrated. She goes, and she hit this gravestone that said Mr. Bean. She goes, it was here by Mr. Bean. I know it was. And it was like she was afraid I would doubt her. That I said, no, I believe you. And so we talked to the sexton, and he said, well, there's some flooding up there. We had to get rid of some of the stones. And so I took the initial profits from my self-published book and I rebuilt that monument because I found out people who had lost children were going to see it. And since that time, I would say hundreds of thousands of people have been to see that angel statue. But even more intriguing is that people, we started to have a ceremony every year. So it's December 6th, so it was last night. And hundreds of people come, and there are people who have lost children who are looking for comfort during the season. Well, there's now 172 of those monuments around the world. And that's just stunning to me. And that was something that people started asking for them. And finally, I asked a friend if she would just take it over and just watch over it. And like we're putting our second one in Japan this year. It's just remarkable how it's spread, but it's about bringing peace and comfort to people throughout the world.
So it was kind of a fun thing for me when I was on your website looking at your angel statue project. There's a spreadsheet on there of all the locations of the angel statues. And just out of curiosity, I was looking if there was any in Ohio, and there's literally one 10 minutes away from the Hudson Library in Stowe. It's at Silver Springs Cemetery. So of course I had to stop by for a quick visit and see it, and it's absolutely beautiful. Let me see if I can screen share really quick because I have a picture of it here.
That's one of the few statues I've actually seen.
It's so pretty, and it was such a nice sunny day that I went to. Whoop. There's nothing to show here. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Where is, okay. Sorry. So this is over at Silver Spring Cemetery in Stowe, and the angel statue is above a plaque, and it says, with hope on its wing, the Christmas box angel is a place of love and healing for those who have lost children. I invite all to leave a white flower at its base, and it's signed Richard Paul Evans. So I thought that was just kind of neat because I'm like, wow, I wonder where there might be one close by. And I'm like, wow, it's literally 10 minutes from us. So that was kind of cool. If you're in the area, you should stop and see it. It's beautiful. And then you also, the Christmas Box International. Can you talk about that a little bit too? Because that's had a major impact on.
This is a really big deal. I look back at the things that I'm most proud of, and one of them is definitely the Christmas Box House. When the first book took off, it went up into an auction, and Simon & Schuster won the auction with a bid of $4.2 million. So I'm going from living in our little 1,400 square foot home, only half of it finished, right? So we're in like 700 square feet, to beat a multimillionaire. And I was literally concerned about it, being raised poor and just being a father. And I wanted my kids to always put God first and to understand the good things in life. I didn't want them to be obsessed with money or material things. And so Carrie and I had a conversation, and Carrie just said, let's give the money back. And I go, well, hold on a second. We worked really hard for this. And that's when it came to the idea, let's see what good we can do with this. And that started a road that was really difficult. It just about bankrupted us, took all of our money the first 4 years. We were the only ones funding it. But our goal was to build shelters for abused and neglected children. Now it's a joy. And so it's a very productive charity. It's a very efficient charity. You can go to thechristmasbox.org and read more about it. But we have housed and defended more than 130,000 abused children. Wow. So enough to fill Madison Square Garden 6.5 times. I have seen those kids grow up to be parents and come to my book signings with their kids. We've broken the cycle of abuse. We also have something we added on. We started to bring Christmas to children. So last year, I think about 2,700 abused children were provided with Christmas at the Christmas Box House. We see ourselves as kind of a conduit between the public and these children who are at risk and in need. And it's now a lot of fun. It's a joy. I love everything we do with it. I love being involved with it. But I tell you, we earned it the hard way. That first 4 years, it took almost all of our money. In fact, it did. We used all of our money and we were taking loans out. I had to promise my wife I wouldn't mortgage the home, and it was horrible because we didn't have children in yet, and it seemed like no one cared. And our motto was no good deed goes unpunished at first. And then we just stuck with it. And we went through it, and it took years, but now I look at it, it's like, so what if we suffered, some years? It's just two of us. There's 135,000 children who have been helped and protected, and their lives saved. So what does it matter if we had some bad years? Mm-hmm. Or even if we lost our fortune? I mean, what does it matter? It's like if you save a life, I mean, what is the price of that? And we're talking, tens of thousands of children. And so I was at a book signing, and this really cute mother was there with her 4 children, happy and well, you could just tell it was a very healthy family. They're joking with each other. And afterwards she goes, "Can we have a picture?" After I signed their books, "Can we have a picture together?" And got it. So I said, "Sure, of course." And I sat there and we got pictures with these kids. And the mother leaned over and she goes, "I'm a Christmas box house kid. I lived in your shelter."
Wow.
And I thought, wow, this is cool. This is the best thing that happened tonight. What a cool thing. Now look at this family, this beautiful family. And she came from no family, to see that the change that we were able to make, so it's a very smart charity. It's a very efficient charity. Our people are way underpaid by their choice. And I'm just really proud of it.
Well, we would love to take some audience questions. Let's see. I know we do have one here in the Q&A. Please feel free to use the Q&A to put your questions in. One of our patrons asked, now I know in your books you talk about that you had Tourette's syndrome. She asked, did you outgrow it?
You don't outgrow it. No, in fact, this is one of the symptoms of Tourette's, a case with me. When I was diagnosed, the doctor asked me, he goes, "Do you have a need to touch sharp objects?" And I started laughing. I took 7 sharp objects out of my pocket. So like while we've been sitting here, I've been doing this. I take a $1 bill, I fold it to a quarter, and I rub it. It brings me comfort. So hold on, Mickey Mouse watch. Anyway, that's so no, I can still see my twitches, and usually when I'm on TV, but it's not as bad as some. But when I was younger, it was pretty severe. And I've had more than 23 tics. And there's something I was very self-conscious about. As a kid, I get bullied about it. And the thing is, I say in my book, A Christmas Memory, it started about that time. I was 8 years old when it first started to manifest. My first tic was like the shrug. And my mom didn't know what was going on. She thought I was just doing it or being a dumb kid. And so she got mad at me and said, "Just stop doing that." And then she said, "If you don't stop doing it, you'll look at that like that man." She pointed to this man at church who was old and bent over and had a hunchback. It's like, great, I'm going to be a 9-year-old hunchback. And so it was years before I was diagnosed. And I was actually only diagnosed because my son Michael has Tourette syndrome. So those who have read the Michael Vey series, they know Michael has Tourette syndrome in the series.
Any other questions from our audience? So you have 5 children?
Yes.
Growing up, did your kids know about Mr. Foster and just that relationship you had with him?
No. And it's interesting. The greatest blessing in my life has been a parent, and also the greatest challenge. But it's fun watching your kids. Like my daughter, Jenna, she was my writing assistant. She's a voracious reader, unlike me. I had trouble reading growing up. And then she became a writing assistant. She was very good at it. And I realized that she had a voice. And so I encouraged her to be a writer, which I wouldn't do if she didn't have the talent. And she wrote her first book. It's called Love and Gelato. And it was a New York Times bestseller. And it was a Netflix movie. You can still see it. It was the #2 movie in the world. And what's interesting is that she's super famous and popular in Brazil. So she went down to Brazil of all, I don't know why Brazil, but she went down there and literally thousands of people came to see her. She had armed bodyguards to follow her around. So she's like a really big deal in Brazil. And
Hmm,
it's fun to see your kids do this, right? So
yeah.
some of you have probably read her books. She's written 3 New York Times bestsellers. Her last book was called Spells for Lost Things. It got a Publishers Weekly starred review, something I've never gotten.
Mhm.
She's a very good writer, and she has a very fun voice.
Nice. Okay. Another patron has asked, how do you keep your children in the faith when the world seems to want to turn people away from it?
That's a good question. This is interesting. I had a woman ask me that in Italy. She said, my daughter went with them. We lived in Florence, Italy, and my kids were exposed to a really kind of wild lifestyle. You know, I mean, the kids smoke openly at school. It's okay. It's like um, we found the kids were having sex by the age of 10. It was like, oh my goodness. It's like, how do you do that? And my daughter Allison was invited to go to Africa with a friend of hers and their parents, and we let her go. And her mother called me. She goes, you know what? She was offered alcohol while she was down there, and she said no. And she goes, there's no one watching her. And she goes, it's like, how did you instill that? And I think 2 things that happen. One is that they respect us as parents. You know, we were always very, very honest with them, and we respected them as children. And they knew that we put their needs ahead of our desires. And so we're friends. You know, they'll call us in their worst times. They'll call us. They know we're on their side. And then the other part is that they watched us model this. You know, if you're a hypocrite, you don't have a chance. It's like, they know that I love God. They know that it's who I am. It's not something I make up or try to push on them, and hope that they come to the same kind of conclusions. But I'm also open about sharing why I believe the way I do, the experiences I've had. And that's not just, I just want to believe this. It's like, no, I've tested my faith, and they know this. There's a time when I went through a horrible business deal, and it just about bankrupted me. And it was horrible. My partners all left, and they left me with the bill, so to speak. And it took me years to pay off millions of dollars of debt. And my daughter said to me when she's older, and she's called, she goes, Dad, you remember what happened with that business? It's horrible. She goes, we were watching. We watched that everything you did with integrity. We saw what you did. We saw that you suffered, but you wanted to do the right thing. She goes, we were paying attention. And that made it all worthwhile. Just that part. It's like, we were watching you, and we know who you are. And so, that's a really important part of being authentic and sincere, but also the honesty. And there's times that you just say, we don't know, honey. We don't know, but this is what's worked for us. And so, and it's not that we've gone without big challenges. Every parent has to, but also allowing the kids to make their own mistakes and to grow, and to have faith in them. That's important. So if you try to force them into a certain mindset and it doesn't work, it's better to lead by example.
Helen asked, what's the most number of books you've written in a year?
3. And that's when I started to get sick of it. It's like, that's all I do. I have no life. Someone asked me, do you golf? No. You ski? No. What do you do? I said, I write. I work all the time. And just kind of the way I grew up. And I wish I were more exciting, but I'm really pretty boring.
Any other questions from the audience tonight?
Can I ask him, did anyone see the movie? The Noel Diary was the #1 movie on Netflix last week. It's starring Justin Hartley of This Is Us. If you haven't seen it, you definitely want to see it. The director is Charles Shire, who did Father of the Bride. It's my first feature film, and it's been just crushing it. New York Times this morning called it the best of the season. And it's fun because they respected my book and they stayed true to it. And so anyway, if you haven't seen it, or if you have seen it, let me know what you think.
Myra asked, do you have any books in progress?
I do. I have Michael Bay 9. I started the Michael Bay series again. I have that. And as soon as I finish that, I will go right into my book for next fall. I also have coming out a year from the spring is a book of essays. And I call it bookmarks. And they're essays I've written over the years about life and love and the world.
That's actually something I really like about your books is they're short. Like you could sit down in an evening and read this, and even the audiobook was, I think, only like 4 or 5 hours. Like, you can just sit down and it's just lighthearted and sentimental, and you can read it in a day or two.
Well, if you remember Brian Lamb from C-SPAN, he goes, how many copies did your first book sell? And at the time it sold a little over 5 million copies. And he said, how much did this new book? And it was my third book. It was The Letter. And I said, that's sold about 750,000 copies. And he goes, this is a lot longer. I go, it's almost triple the length of the Christmas box. And he goes, so why don't you just write shorter books? Good point, right? And so I actually went to my publisher this year. I said, I want to do 2 things. I want to write a shorter book and I want to charge less money. It's like, I want to get more on the line of the Christmas box. And we had our highest pre-orders in history, but people are buying the books and sharing it. And they're buying multiples. Like I said, that one woman wanted to buy 14 copies. It's very rarely at a book signing does someone buy just 1 copy.
Yeah, it would make a lovely gift for sure. One of our patrons asked, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
I didn't. I never really thought it was a possibility, but I started to find that I was just good at it. And my brother, Mark, like in the book, he would tell me, it's like, you're better at this than you think. You're really good at this. And, I really struggled as a teenager. I had Tourette syndrome and acne, and we were poor. And I found that, I was never with the popular kids, but I found that I would write there when they'd run for like a, student body president. I would write their little skits and things like that. And I started to find that this was my superpower, was writing. And so I started to, write for the school newspaper and just went from there. And then I became an advertising copywriter. And I started to win awards for my writing. And that's how it started. But I never really thought being a novelist was possible, because I knew that people who were much more educated and spent their lives pursuing this. I thought, there's no way I'll be able to do that. It's like me wanting to be an astronaut. It's not going to happen. And so it was this incredible, beautiful miracle when I wrote the Christmas boxes just as a neighbor gift and family gift, and it went viral.
Wow. 8 million copies have been sold, I think I read.
Yeah, insane.
Jan asked, do you have any books that you started to write and didn't finish?
Many. The early phases of a novel are always interesting. So I maybe not many, maybe like 5, 35. Usually what happens is they evolve. I've never written the book I thought I was writing. So I've started the novel and then it just starts to evolve and change. I did write 1 full book, which was never published, and I decided it was awful. And it was after the Christmas box had become a local bestseller. It hadn't gone national yet. I mean, I wrote it, remember I just handed some out, and it was selling like crazy. And the books distributor came to me, it's like, you need to write another one. We're making all this money off of it. So I wrote a book really fast. It was called Timepiece. And it's not the Timepiece that was published. It was called Timepiece. And I remember I gave it to my wife. I wrote it in like 4 weeks. And I gave it to her. And when I saw her, she didn't want to talk to me about it. I was like, well, what did you think? And finally she goes, well, it was, and she goes, it was awful. It was an awful book. She goes, is this really the best you can do? And I said, no, I wrote it for the money. And she said, never do that again, and never show me a book and ask me about a book that you didn't do your best on. And it was a great lesson for me, because I promised her I never would. And so we have a little ritual that when I finish a book, I give it to her and I say, this is the best I can do. It's the
Hmm.
best book I could write. So
A comment from our audience. Nancy said, the world needs more boring authors like Mr. Evans. So there is nothing wrong with being boring because you clearly are entertaining millions of people with your writings.
that's funny.
Helen said that she watched the Noel Diary and it was a great movie.
So good, yeah. I've
Kate,
never
sorry.
heard from so many people. I'm having high school friends and buddies and people that I just kind of knew that are reaching out and saying, "Watch your movie last night." And it's
Oh,
when you have, when you reach, gosh, we're like 60 million people. I mean, it's crazy. It's kind of crazy.
it must be kind of cool too to see like your ideas come now to kind of come to life in a movie. It's probably a neat
Yeah,
experience to see what you put into it to now have something to actually see.
it's not kind of cool. It's a lot cool.
It's very cool for
It's
sure.
very cool. And we also got to do something. It was on kind of on my bucket list I'd given up on. I always thought when I was younger how cool it'd be to have um, a Hollywood walkthrough, like a red carpet thing. And I did about 15 years ago. I just gave up on it. That's never going to happen. And then when they contacted me last year and said, "Hey, the movie's out," and Carrie and I got to see it, and they said, "Well, we're having a Hollywood showing. We'd like you to come with the stars and actors and and we flew to California. It was magical. I could show this because all those who love Justin Hartley loved it. Justin wasn't supposed to be there. This is part of the red carpet. That's with my wife. I love it. Now Justin Hartley and director Charles Shire. Isn't that fun?
Mhm.
So he wasn't supposed to be there, and Carrie goes, "It's too bad," because he was doing all the New York TV shows and everything promoting the movie, and which is cool. It's a lot of work, and he was pushing the movie, and he showed up, and Carrie goes, "Too bad he's not here." I go, "Honey, oh my gosh, turn around, that's him." And I go, "You're very handsome." Not like he doesn't know this, right? He's like, he goes, "Well, so are you." And I said, "Well, thank you, but no, you're like claw your eyes out handsome. Like I say your name and women like tense up. They just like they pass out." He was actually really cool. Met his wife, and it was so fun. That night we went to our hotel, and Carrie goes, "Because you're not gonna be able to sleep tonight, are you?" And I said, "There's no way." And I said, "I don't want to. I just wanted to hold on to this moment. It was like a dream come true, and it was really beautiful, and everyone was really kind, and it was really fun. And it's like, wow, what a peak experience. Where do you go from there?"
Okay, yes. Do you have favorite authors that you like to read in all your free time?
Yeah, I don't read novels, which is weird. I just don't read them. I don't watch the kind of movies they make, which is also really weird. I like Eric Larson. I like nonfiction. I read nonfiction. I love history. I love studying history, and I love biographies.
One of her patrons, it's more of a comment, but she said she has two family members with Tourette's and they are reading your book now and said thank you for writing about it.
Yeah, because my son Michael has Tourette's, and and I'm fine. I'm grateful I had Tourette's. I mean, I've had good come from it. But I saw how much he struggled, and I saw kids that struggled, and I thought, if I could write a book that would make Tourette's cool. And so, and I started to see this. I started to hear from parents, like one school teacher, a kid came up to her and he goes, "Why couldn't I have been born with Tourette's? Some people have all the luck." And I thought, that's fantastic. If I can and I've had kids all over say, "You've made my life easier." One young woman came up to me. I was at a Comic-Con. She said, "May I hug you?" And I go, "Well, sure." And she goes, "I love you, Mr. Evans." I said, "Well, that's cute. Why do you love me?" She said, "I have Tourette's syndrome. The kids used to tease me, but now they're all Michael Bay fans. And I think it would be disrespectful to Michael that their favorite guy has Tourette's syndrome. So now they think I'm kind of cool." And she goes, "You made my life so much better." And I just love that. But I was hoping to do that. If Harry Potter had Tourette's syndrome, it would be the coolest thing in the world to have, right? And so I wanted to make, I'm a parent, I'm a dad. And so in my own small way, I wanted to make the world a better place for my son with Tourette's, and at least help people understand what Tourette syndrome is.
Absolutely. Well, I think we will wrap up tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we always appreciate your time here at the Hudson Library. We are wrapping up our virtual author series for 2022, but we have some exciting things coming in 2023. So we hope that you'll continue to join us. And of course, I'd love to thank our author tonight for his time talking about his latest book, A Christmas Memory. I have a link in the chat if you would like to purchase your copy from the Learned Owl. And tissues are not included with the purchase, but you will need them. Thank you all so much, and have a nice holiday season. And of course, have a good evening.
And thank you, Allison. You're delightful.
Thank you. Have a good night. We appreciated everything we talked about tonight. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.